How did indigenous peoples impact international environmental and climate change debates? And how did they link those to land rights as well as their other human rights? Indigenous people's special relation to the land and their worldviews have by now projected an ethic at the international level of indigenous peoples as guardians of a safe environment and as holders of precious traditional knowledge. This has also prompted discussions around justice associated to access and benefit sharing of genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge. After human rights, the next international issue that the indigenous peoples movement tried to reform was the environment. The Rio UN Conference on Environment and Development in 1992 became a rallying space and time for the movement to galvanize its thinking and action. The issue of environmental sustainability brings out what is called the intercomplementarity and interdependence of human rights. The environment is for indigenous peoples linked to many of their human rights, including the right to self-determination, the right to development, subsistence rights, the right to land, the right to health, the right to education, their cultural human rights, including protection and development of their traditional knowledge, their right to survive as a cultural group, as a people, and in some instances, their very physical survival. So, who impacts the environment where indigenous peoples live? One major actor is the human race and the dominant development paradigm that has affected the climate. And we know that climate change is a major issue impacting greatly on indigenous peoples. Another impact is brought upon indigenous peoples' environment due to extractive industries and other economic activities exploitative of natural resources, such as logging, where the industries are private or whether they belong to the state. And yet another impact is brought onto indigenous peoples due to, ironically, environmental activism. In other words, the large, rich, and influential environmental organizations that have pushed for the creation of nature parks around the world, most of which have had devastating effects on indigenous peoples because of their removal from their traditional lands. As of 2014, 13% of the world's lands were nature parks, and another 13% was under preparation. In 1992, at the Rio Conference on Environment and Development, indigenous peoples and environmentalists worked together. However, a major split took place soon after between those two movements, because environmentalists did not include indigenous peoples in their consultations, plans, and programs. They tended to look at the environment without the indigenous peoples, who very often had to be displaced from their ancestral lands to leave the nature park alone. We have seen examples where, in cases where indigenous peoples were displaced from their lands, corporations came in later to extract precious minerals or establish other business activities. In Kenya, for example, there have been repeated evictions of the Ogiek and Sengwer from their ancestral forests since the creation of Mount Elgon Traditional Park and Game Reserve. They are denied their cultural and subsistence practices, and those trying to return to their lands are regularly arrested or even killed by armed eco-guards. In the 5 countries of the Congo Basin, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, Gabon, and Republic of the Congo, the creation of at least 26 of the protected areas resulted in partial or complete relocation or displacement of indigenous and farm communities, and no reparation whatsoever was reported. Of the 34 protected areas studied, 25 bordered the logging concessions. 19 overlapped with mining concessions, and 9 overlapped with oil concessions. Indigenous peoples participated at the Rio Conference in Brazil and adopted the Carioca Declaration and the Indigenous Peoples Earth Charter. Indigenous peoples were and are advocates of a holistic approach combining the ecosystems approach and the human rights-based approach to development. In other words, people with the environment. In Rio, states adopted Agenda 21, a vision for sustainable development for the 21st century. In the Rio Declaration, it is recognized that respect for indigenous knowledge, cultures, and traditional practices contributes to sustainable and equitable development and proper management of the environment. The Rio Conference also led to the adoption of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD. Article 8J of the CBD specifically mentions indigenous peoples. It recognizes the obligation of each state party, quote, subject to its national legislation, to respect, preserve, and maintain knowledge, innovations, and practices of indigenous and local communities, embodying traditional lifestyles relevant to the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, and promote their wider application with the approval and involvement of the holders of such knowledge, innovations, and practices, and encourage the equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the utilization of such knowledge, innovations, and practices, unquote. Despite its weakness at the beginning through the phrase subject to national legislation, Article 8J opened the road for indigenous peoples to fight for the protection of their traditional knowledge that was and is the target of huge economic interests. See, for instance, patenting of traditional knowledge, bioprospecting by multinationals, etc. No fewer than 15 intergovernmental organizations, including the World Bank, deal with traditional knowledge today, showing that the stakes are very high on this. The indigenous movement brought and is bringing together human rights and the environmental issue through their engagement with Article 8J and the working group established by CBD states parties to promote its implementation. Some normative and policy developments based on the implementation of Article 8J of the Convention on Biological Diversity and that are important for indigenous peoples are the following. States adopted voluntary guidelines for the conduct of cultural, environmental, and social impact assessments regarding developments proposed to take place on or which are likely to impact on sacred sites and on lands and waters traditionally occupied or used by indigenous and local communities. Second, after long debates, CBD adopted 3 indicators to measure the status and trends in traditional knowledge. A, status and trends of linguistic diversity and numbers of speakers of indigenous languages. B, status and trends in land use change and land tenure in the traditional territories of indigenous and local communities. And C, status and trends in the practice of traditional occupations. CBD also adopted the Code of Ethical Conduct to ensure respect for the cultural and intellectual heritage of indigenous and local communities. Last but not least, the Nagoya Protocol. This CBD-related treaty was adopted in 2010 and is a major instrument on access to genetic resources and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from their utilization. The Nagoya Protocol has to do with trade of products in connection with private corporations and aims to balance out interests, especially between developing countries and developed countries where big corporations are situated. So there is benefit sharing between them and states. Indigenous peoples managed to get their demands on benefit sharing accepted in this treaty as sub-state actors. Implementation remains a challenge. Another impact of indigenous peoples' involvement in these debates over the decades has been a conceptual synthesis now known as biocultural diversity, demonstrating the inextricable relation between cultural diversity and biological diversity.